Okay, so imagine this.
Hmm.
A family, right? But not just any family. We're talking one of the largest families of dwarfs ever recorded in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Their lives were, full of music, performance. They toured Europe as the Lilliput Troupe, celebrated
Absolutely. A really vibrant existence by all accounts.
until history takes this incredibly dark, unimaginable turn.
Right into the depths of Auschwitz.
That's the core question that hits you straight away, isn't it?
Uh-huh.
How did their unique identity, their dwarfism, something that in other times or even in that time might have marked them for ostracization or worse, how did that become their unlikely shield?
It's profoundly counterintuitive, and it's a story that really twists every expectation.
It really does.
So that's what we're diving into today. We're exploring the extraordinary true story told in the book In Our Hearts We Were Giants by Yehuda Koren and Eilert Negev.
An incredible book. It details the Ovitz family Jewish 7 dwarfs, plus their normal-sized relatives and how they survived Auschwitz, largely because of the twisted fascination of Dr. Josef Mengele.
Exactly. So our plan for this deep dive is basically threefold.
Okay.
First, we need to set the scene, look at their lives before the war, their family backstory. It's quite rich.
Right, get the context.
Then we'll dig into the main lessons, the really striking insights from their survival in Auschwitz itself.
The core experience.
And finally, we'll talk about how their story still resonates, why it's, still so relevant today.
It sounds like a plan. Let's start at the beginning, or maybe closer to the end, with Perla.
Yeah, starting with Perla Ovitz in her later years really gives you a sense of their spirit. The book paints this picture of her specially adapted home, low light switches, knee-high stove, even needing a cane just to open the fridge. But her spirit, undimmed, still putting on theatrical makeup, bright red nails.
That motto.
Right. As long as you breathe, you should look your best. I don't want people to pity me. It says so much.
It really does. Incredible resilience. But the family story starts much earlier, doesn't it? Back in Transylvania.
Way back. 1868, Rosablea, Transylvania, Shimshon Isaac Ovitz. He's the first dwarf in their recorded family history.
And born against this backdrop of local legends about giants and little people, apparently.
Yeah, which is quite something. His parents, Frida and Live, were understandably distressed. They even tried to sort of halt destiny by naming him Shimshon Isaac after Samson, the biblical giant.
Wow. That didn't quite work out, I guess.
No. By age 7, his dwarfism was clear. And, dwarfism in Jewish tradition at the time, it was complex.
How so?
Well, some holy texts could define a dwarf as a cripple, which meant disqualification from certain religious roles, and folk tales sometimes saw it as punishment.
Oof.
But, and this is key, it could also be seen as a sign of distinction. There was this popular belief that dwarfs had great wisdom, maybe even magical powers, as sort of compensation.
Interesting. Like Rabbi Gadil in some tale.
Exactly. And Shimshon Isaac, he definitely leaned into that perception. He was incredibly resourceful.
So how did he build his life? What did he do?
First, he became a badshin. That's like a wandering jester, master of ceremonies at weddings, known for being super witty, wise in the Talmud, brilliant entertainer, helped establish Yiddish theater, actually.
Really? That's amazing.
Then he shifted gears, became more of a rabbinic figure, offered spiritual guidance, healing amulets, spells, practical advice, and he was apparently paid handsomely for it.
Oh, he moved up in the world.
Big time. From cantor to wizard to landlord, quite the social mobility.
And his family life was also quite something.
Yes. His first wife, Brana, gave him 2 dwarf daughters, Rosika and Franziska. Sadly, Brana died young, tuberculosis.
Okay.
But then he remarried. Bachia Bertha Huss, a normal-sized woman, even though there was a big age gap.
And they had more children.
They did. A mix, Avram, Frida, Mickey, Elizabeth, and Perla were dwarfs. Sarah and Leah were tall. This mix is what made them the largest recorded dwarf family. Quite unique.
You get this picture of a big, bustling household.
Totally. A large home in Rosablea, self-sufficient with an orchard, livestock, but then tragedy struck again. Bachia died in 1927. Oh, no. And her dying wish really shaped everything that came after. She told them, "Through thick and thin, never separate, stick together, guard each other, and live for one another." And she pushed them to find a common skill.
And that led to the troupe.
Exactly. Ovram, just 20, took over as head of the family. They had klezmer relatives, musicians, so that was an influence.
Right.
So the Ovitz dwarfs formed the Lilliput Troupe. Rosika and Franziska got quarter-sized violins, Frida a cymbal with shortened legs. They all learned instruments. Evram managed, Sarah handled costumes.
And they took off.
massively successful, toured all over Romania. People were fascinated. They did well, invested in gold, jewelry, even got a car in the mid-30s.
The first and only one in the reason, the book says.
Can you imagine? And reinforcing that unity Batu wanted, 3 dwarf sisters married normal height men who moved into the Ovitz home.
Wow, so they were really thriving.
Yeah.
But then the world started changing.
Yeah, the shadow of the Holocaust starts creeping in. Initially, they were kind of unaware of Hitler, the rise of anti-Semitism elsewhere.
And they even welcomed the Hungarian re-annexation of Transylvania in 1940.
Tragically, yes. They thought it was a return to a golden era, completely missing the deep anti-Semitism of the new regime. A terrible misjudgment.
It's chilling. And they even managed to get false papers.
Shows their resourcefulness again, right? They apparently charmed some officials to get non-Jewish ID cards, but the war machine caught up.
The normal-sized men got conscripted.
Right. Eri, Azriel, Izo, Moshe, sent to labor camps. Suddenly, the dwarfs lost essential help, transport. It left them really vulnerable.
And refugees started arriving with horror stories.
Terrifying tales. But the Ovitzes felt paralyzed. Their physical situation, fleeing, just wasn't really an option they felt they had.
Meanwhile, the final solution is underway elsewhere, massacres like Kamenets-Podolsk. But deportations from Hungary were delayed for a bit.
Yes, the Hungarian government held off for a while, so the Ovitzes actually kept performing, maybe clinging to hope the war would end soon.
Until March 1944.
March 19th, 1944. Arrested in Szolnok, Hungary, then sent back towards Rosalia, a forced march. It was terrifying. Though there's this bizarre anecdote where some gendarmes found their performances amusing, maybe bought them a tiny bit of time, who knows?
It's just surreal. They even had a Passover Seder, not knowing the ghettoization decree had just been issued.
Incredible, isn't it? Then the cattle cars, May 1944. Destination, Auschwitz-Birkenau. And they tried to bring their instruments, their costumes.
Still performers, right to the end.
Clinging to who they were. The arrival, pure chaos. Selections, families torn apart. Someone tells them chillingly, this is the grave of Israel. You'll end up in the Evans.
Just horrific.
Yeah.
But then the twist.
The big twist. Normally, a small group like theirs, especially with disabilities, would be sent straight to the gas. But Mengele was on the ramp that day. He shouts, twins step out.
Ah, Mengele's obsession with twins.
And twins and other genetic anomalies, the Ovitz family, this strange, immobile coil of 12 people, 7 dwarfs, their taller relatives, they stood out. An SS officer spots them, brings them to Mengele's attention.
And Mengele selects them. Not for death, but for something else.
For his research. It's a stark contrast to what happened to Laia Graf, another dwarf performer mentioned in the book. Arrested, sent to Auschwitz, died. The Ovitz's unique group identity, their dwarfism, it became their perverse lifeline.
Okay, so let's get into that. Part 2. The experience in Auschwitz, this privileged status. What did that actually mean day to day? It sounds so wrong to even use that word here.
It feels deeply wrong, but it's the only way to describe the difference. They weren't treated like other prisoners. They had a small, private room within a barrack. Not bunks, but actual beds with blankets, sheets, pillows. Unheard of.
Wow.
Mengele is apparently obsessed with hygiene, maybe worried about contaminating his specimens. So they got a chamber pot, an aluminum bowl for daily washing, kept separate.
And food. Was it any different?
Still vile, make no mistakes, but sometimes slightly better. The book mentions things like milk soup, white bread, cheese, sausage occasionally, but the constant blood tests left them incredibly weak, fatigued.
So, this research, what was Mengele actually doing or trying to do?
That's the truly disturbing part. It seems to have been largely pointless, scientifically speaking. Endless tests, endless measurements, x-rays, constant blood draws, painful gynecological exams, eye drops that cause temporary blindness.
Just torture disguised as science.
Pretty much. Dina Gottlieb, an artist prisoner, was forced to sketch their bodies for Mengele's records. He apparently confessed this childhood fascination with Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs.
Seriously.
Yeah. And the Ovitz family with 7 dwarfs. It seemed to fit this weird narrative in his head. He planned to write a book, gather photographic evidence for his theories on heredity and race.
But did he find anything? Any actual insights?
The book is quite clear. He had very few findings to report. Despite his strong racial beliefs that science produced almost nothing. It really just highlights the pseudo-scientific cruelty of the whole Nazi ideology.
So their dwarfism, this physical difference that Nazi ideology targeted for elimination, it paradoxically saved them. How make sense of that?
It's a chilling paradox. Historically, dwarfs were sometimes seen as Human wonders, mirabilia hominum, not necessarily monsters. They could evoke smiles, maybe even a protective instinct in some.
Like curiosity.
Exactly. And for Mengele, they were the ultimate curiosity. Combine their dwarfism with their known artistic talent and that incredible family unity. It gave them a bizarre kind of value in his eyes, protection denied to almost everyone else.
A value that others with disabilities or even normal people didn't have in that context.
Precisely. We mentioned Lyograph, and Alexander Catan, another dwarf, experimented on and killed in Mauthausen, his skeleton kept for study. The Ovitzes escaped that fate because of Mengele's specific perverse interest. There's even that story of Karl Stochka, a normal-sized Romani boy who pretended to be strong like a dwarf to survive selection in Buchenwald. Shows how powerful that perception could be.
It's incredible. And amidst all this horror, the resilience, Batia's command, never separate, that must have been vital.
Absolutely fundamental. They looked after each other. The tall siblings, Sarah, Leah, Dora, the Slumowitz in-laws, they were crucial in helping the dwarfs physically navigate the camp. That unit held strong.
And they held on to their dignity too, didn't they? Perla, with her makeup.
Yes. Little acts of defiance against the dehumanization, Perla's makeup routine. And the book says they would sing together quietly in their room, recalling the good old days, sometimes just letting themselves cry together, maintaining that inner life.
But there's that difficult question about performing for the Nazis.
Yeah, that's a really complex moral area. Perla, for the rest of her life, denied they ever performed publicly in Auschwitz, even though there are eyewitness accounts suggesting they did, perhaps under duress from Mengele.
Why the denial, do you think?
The book suggests immense shame. The idea of entertaining Nazis while, as Perla put it, the chimneys never stopped smoking. She saw it as an abomination, like celebrating in a graveyard. It speaks to the deep psychological scars, the fight to keep their art, their identity, separate from their captors.
But there was some performing for survival.
It seems so, more pragmatically. Elizabeth, one of the sisters, apparently gave secret concerts for kitchen staff to get extra scraps of food. You see this blend of artistic integrity and sheer survival instinct, making impossible choices.
Which brings us to liberation. January 27, 1945. The Red Army arrives.
A day they remembered as Shabbath Shira, the Sabbath of Song, commemorating the Israelites' deliverance from Egypt, a powerful symbol for them.
But freedom wasn't simple, was it?
Not at all. They went to Krakow first, and that's when the suppressed trauma really hit. The book describes nonstop weeping, obsessive recounting of the horrors. It all came flooding back.
And then going home, back to Roosevelt.
That was another harsh reality. Their home was looted, the synagogue destroyed, and the neighbors, outright hostility. We have it so good without you. Why have you returned? Awful.
Unbelievable.
They had a symbolic act, burning their camp clothes, trying to shed that past.
But then something amazing happened. The gold.
Yes. The buried treasure. They'd hidden gold and jewelry under their car before being deported, and they found it. Miraculously, it was still there. That gave them the means to start again.
So they decided to leave Europe, understandably.
Yes, the lingering anti-Semitism was too much. They debated America or Israel. Avram made the final call. Enough wandering. It's time we settle down and live among our kin. So Israel it was.
They arrived in Haifa in May 1949 on a ship called Atzmut Independence.
Quite fitting. Their reception in Israel, it was mixed. A lot of public curiosity, sometimes intrusive staring.
How did they handle that?
Per Lala, characteristically defiant. We're not intimidated by inquisitive eyes. If this is the shape God destined for us, we have no complaints against him. But there were other tensions. The book mentions a painful falling out with the Slomowitz family who survived with them. Shared trauma doesn't always unite people afterwards. Resentments surface.
And their living conditions weren't great initially.
No, they were in an immigrant camp, a flimsy wooden barrack near the sea. Perla apparently remarked wryly how in Auschwitz, Mengele gave them better quarters because they were specimens, whereas in Israel it felt like they didn't want to waste proper housing on dwarfs. A bitter observation.
Ouch. But the Lilliput Troupe, they made a comeback.
They did. They managed to get tax-exempt status, incredibly recognized as a celebrated institution, like the Israeli Philharmonic.
Wow. How did they adapt their act for Israel?
They incorporated Hebrew, developed new material, tragicomic stuff, reflecting maybe some of their experiences. Skits like The Double Wedding and Death Tango became really popular. They adapted. They thrived again for a time.
And then they transitioned out of performing.
Yeah. Eventually, they became cinema owners in Haifa, running the Stockgarten and Carmel cinemas. The family stayed together, though challenges remained. Slowly, old age took them. Mickey, Avram, Frida, Elizabeth, Sarah, Leah, until only Perla was left from the original troupe.
Which brings us to that controversy about their instruments.
Right. Instruments claimed to be theirs or sold to Yad Vashem, the Holocaust memorial. But the book raises doubts, quoting an expert violin maker, Amnon Weinstein, who points out inconsistencies. It raises difficult questions about historical authenticity versus potentially capitalizing on a Holocaust story. It's murky.
But Perla herself, she never stopped telling the story.
Never. She felt it was a sacred duty. In Auschwitz, I swore that if God let me stay alive, I would tell my story again and again until my breath died out so that no one could say it never happened. That determination is powerful.
She spoke to school children.
Yes, on Holocaust Memorial Day, she'd even bring Mengele's photo, wanting them to know the face of the perpetrator. She endured chronic pain from her dwarfism, the immense trauma, yet she kept going.
The heart is crying, but the lips are smiling. That motto again.
Captures it perfectly, and her faith remained unshaken. Unlike many survivors, she didn't lose her faith in God. She refused simple explanations like blaming Jewish sins. For her, it was beyond human comprehension. We are too small and lowly to comprehend God's intentions. The fire was his will, as it was his will that our whole family would survive.
It's a remarkable perspective.
Yeah.
And the fight for dignity continues even now, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The book mentions Alphonse Catan's fight to reclaim his father's remains from Mauthausen, the dignity of the individual versus historical preservation, and Perla's German friend encountering people today who think the Nazi idea of euthanizing dwarfs was not bad after all.
Chilling. It shows why these stories must keep being told.
Urgently. Perla died peacefully in 2001, but her voice, their family's story, it echoes.
Okay, so as we wrap up, let's think about some questions you, listening to this, might still have after hearing this incredible story.
Right. For instance, you might wonder, what specific medical insights did Mengele actually claim to get? And the answer, based on the book, is almost none. It underscores the absolute perversion of his work.
Mm-hmm. And what about the children who survived with them? Like Avram's daughter, Batia, or Leah's son, Shimshon Jr., how did they cope later in life?
The book gives hints Shimshon Jr.'s fear of passing on dwarfism, for example, but it's clear the trauma echoed through generations. Even as they tried to build new lives, the impact was deep.
Were other dwarf families targeted? What happened to them?
We know of others who didn't survive, Lyograph, Alexander Catan. It really emphasizes that the Ovitz's survival was this extraordinary, almost unbelievable exception tied directly to Mengele's specific obsession. It wasn't the norm.
And the view of survivors in Israel, how does that evolve?
Well, initially it was complex, basic conditions in the camps, but their talent eventually got them that celebrated institution status. So there was recognition, maybe partly pragmatic at first, not wanting them reliant on welfare, but it evolved.
Right. And finally, what happened to their legacy, their assets, after Perla died, beyond those disputed instruments?
The book mentions they sold their cinema complex in '79, bought a large flat together. But the instruments issue is a reminder that legacies, especially after trauma like the Holocaust, can become complicated, contested ground.
Absolutely. So to sum up, the Ovitz family story, in our hearts we were giants. It's more than just history.
Much more. It's this incredible testament to family unity, to sheer resilience, the fight for dignity against, well, utter dehumanization.
It reminds you that even in the absolute darkest times, you find these sparks of life, of connection, of the will to just keep going.
Definitely.
So as we leave you to think about this, consider this. The Ovitzes went from Transylvanian stages through the hell of Auschwitz to building a new life in Israel. Their insistence on art, on family, on dignity. What does that tell us about what it truly means to be a giant?
And maybe more importantly, how do we make sure the lessons from their survival, that resilience, that warning, keep echoing? How do we truly ensure that, as Perla wished, no one can ever say it never happened?